You know, Battlefield's been around for a bit. To be honest, I picked up one of those games and I had a lot of fun with it. I don't remember which one it was I was playing, but, it's got its fan base, just like Call of Duty and anything else. A large fan base. But, they tend to voice their opinions too. They're not afraid to tell you whether they enjoy something or not. And of course, with Battlefield 5, an uproar has happened because of that trailer. And on one hand, I don't have a problem with the trailer itself. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but hear me out. First off, let's say Battlefield 5 is an alternative history. From what I've gathered from other people who have played the games and loved the series and all that good stuff, generally Battlefield, when set in a historical setting, has gone for sort of that historical realism kind of thing, that feel, where they've gone for historical accuracy as best as they can. And of course, you're going to have that one jackass who goes up there, but you could jump out of the plane and ride on top of it. How historically accurate is that? Those holes in your theory. And it's like, dude, seriously, it's a fucking game. There are glitches. There are things that don't fit. There are some things that they have to substitute because they can't get what they really want done in the game, and it worked. Maybe what they were originally trying to do couldn't work for whatever reason, whether it was the limitations of the hardware, the software just didn't want to function right, whatever, but there are also glitches and other things, and stuff aren't 100% perfect. That's the thing, it's 100%, it can't be 100% perfect. There's a difference when a game comes out and says it is striving for historical accuracy, and then somebody starts picking holes out of it. It's like, well, they didn't wear that then that time period. No, they didn't, but it was more visually appealing to the audience for them to wear that. Therefore, that's why we chose it instead. Yes, it didn't come on until, a century later, but everything else we strived for as close to historically accurate as we could. We even had a historian on team to make sure we had things close to that time period as possible. But of course, with this and DICE's thing, you've got a woman with a bionic arm, essentially, fighting in a war, and I honestly don't know what the trailer's going for, to be totally honest. I am confused, confuzzled about that trailer. What are we doing? You said something about World War II, but clearly we're not in World War II. I mean, heck, you've got a woman with a bionic arm running around with a rifle. That is not World War II. And yes, there are people like, for instance here, this quote from EA's Chief Creative Officer, Patrick whatever, and him talking to apparently Game Sutra. I know that site exists, but Game Sutra, really? Anyway, Battlefield 5 is a lot about the unseen, the untold, the unplayed. The EA Chief Creative Officer Patrick told Game Sutra. The common perception is that there were no women in World War II. There were tons of women who both fought in World War II and partook in the war. He goes on to state that the development team pushed for women to be included in the game, that his daughter doesn't understand why people are upset, that both men and women want to play as a woman, and that's just the way gaming is these days. And, first off, I get that. Battlefield 5 is a lot about the unseen, the untold, and the unplayed. Okay, got that. Why didn't you say that to begin with? First, go ahead and tell everybody, look, I know you were looking for World War II, this is going to be set in World War II, but it's going to be an alternative history thing, so things aren't going to be anywhere near historically accurate. However, the machines and the tanks and everything else are going to be more close to World War II, and the time and the years, they're going to be set in the World War II era, but it's going to be like, Earth 2 kind of deal, or Earth 3, going to DC or something. It's going to be an alternative Earth, an alternative history of how this worked. Because, you know what? Women did fight in the war. On about 2 armies, I think, or maybe 3. I want to say the Russians had somebody like the Night Wings, the Night Hawks, or something like that. It was essentially a bomber platoon, or however you want to go about it, that flew at night, and it was made up of all women. And then you had the French, who had female snipers. But for the large bulk majority, especially if you're going towards from the US perspective, in World War II, which usually a lot of these games tend to do, they go from the Allied forces, where a bulk majority came from the US, and their experiences, and they're going through the war. We didn't have women fighting in the war. Most of our women partook in the war effort. Have you ever seen the "we can do it" signs? They came from, those things where women were in the factories, building the shells, building the machinery, the biplanes, the whatever, and putting all these pieces together, and food and other stuff, and sending it to our boys across the pond, fighting a war. They didn't partake in the war, which I think is where a lot of people get upset. It's like, oh, wait a second, every time you've done this in the past, you've never had that, and we don't mind that option at all. I don't think anybody would really care, that there's a woman being there, but you weren't up front with the alternative history. In fact, I don't think you've actually said it yet. Instead, you've been calling people man-children, man-childs, and so on and so forth, because they can't handle it for whatever reason. But you're also still sticking to the guns that were in World War II. They fought in the war. They didn't. If maybe Battlefield 5 was a game all about that Russian detachment of women who ran bombing runs. I want to say it's the Russians. May not have been the Russians. I could be slightly off on that. My history's not the best in the world. But, if you wanted to do that, I don't think anybody would have said anything about that. You come out, you explain, back in World War II, so-and-so had this detachment of women. These badass women who went out and blew the crap out of the Germans. They took Nazi scalps. They ate it for breakfast. And stuff like that. I probably would charge the audience. They'd be like, holy shit, really? Did that actually happen? People starts looking it up. And they find out, oh, this was a real thing. We're getting a game around that? That is amazing. They would be way more okay with that, more than likely. Or at least I would. I mean, I honestly think that would be a badass thing. It's like, you want to go for this whole throw the whammons into everything. That's fine. You want to build a game around just purely women. That might be the way to do it. Go for historical accuracy and tell their untold stories. Go through their daily life. Go through their mission briefs and what they might be. And show how awesome they are. That would be pretty cool. But instead, we get this trailer with no real explanation other than this is a World War II style game. And then everybody's like, but that's not historically accurate. Of course it's not. First off, even if women were fighting in the front lines, I don't think they'd be fighting with, like, bionic arm to begin with, a prosthetic like that. They would have been shipped home at that point, and the same thing with the men. Unless there was no other choice, you don't see a guy hobbling out with a crutch because he's lost half his leg to go shooting at people. Unless there was no other choice in the matter. He gets sent back home. They ship him off, providing he survived, the amputation, didn't get infected, and died, because medical science wasn't that far along back then. Of course, it was further than it was before that, so I don't know. Anyway. But yeah, this whole thing with Battlefield, first off, be more clear about what you're doing, instead of throwing it back at the consumers and calling them man-children. This is what happened when Ghostbusters 2016 did it. You never go Ghostbusters 2016, and it looks like you're going full Ghostbusters 2016 with this. If that is not a meme yet, it needs to be. Somebody should do that. But anyway, and you really shouldn't go about it that way. Your fan base is what makes you you. They found that out the hard way with Ghostbusters. They recently found out that way with Solo, a Star Wars story. When you attack the fan base will reject you. It doesn't matter what it's about at that point. Whether they had legitimate criticisms or not, or whether you're just referring to this tiny minority of like 3 people who's yelling at somebody saying, "Women shock!" When you start calling the entire fan base man-children and babies and Nazis and things like that, that is when you have lost all credibility to a majority of the fan base. They will boycott you purely on principle at that point, not for any other reason other than, oh really? We sat here and we gave you some legitimate criticism of things we don't like. We wanted answers for things that we didn't like, and instead you attack us for it. And then you go off, well, if you don't like it, don't buy it. Okay, we won't buy it. And then it bombs, like Solo did, or Ghostbusters 2016. Because that is exactly where you're heading to. Although, I will say, Battlefield has a huge fan base. And I guess it really just depends on how many people get, actually see this. The exposure that this whole thing gets will determine how well their sales will going to be. And I really am I wouldn't mind seeing how that plays out. Because if a large enough portion of that fan base sees it, and, they hear, oh, is that what the developers really think of us? Well, I hear there's a new Gears game coming out. You guys want to play Gears of War instead? Or something else? Honestly, I don't even remember who develops Gears. But, they're more than likely going to go to do something else. They're going to pick up another game. They're going to play something completely different than yours. And that's basically based on your reaction and how you've treated them. And then at that point, you're going to sit there and blame them. You're going to call them misogynists, bigots, racists, everyest under the sun. And it's going to make it worse for you. It really will. What do you think about all this, though? Do you think DICE is going the right way about this? Or are you thinking they're going the wrong way? Would you be okay if they came out and told you that this was an alternative history version of what happened during World War II? It's like Earth 2 version of World War II. Would you have been okay with that? Or would you still have been upset if you happen to be one of those people upset? Those are things I'd like to know down in the comments below. And before you go through that, when I was describing a game with the female bombers, would you be interested in that? I know I would, but I'm just curious if anybody else would legitimately be okay and interested in that kind of a game. You know, you've got sort of the stealth fighter feel to it, and you've got to go through these missions, and then maybe we can add some alternative stealthy thingies, kind of like, Metal Gear, where you've got to infiltrate, the enemy base and other stuff. Yeah, anyway, I think that might be kind of cool. What do you think? Do you think that would be pretty awesome? Let me know that one too down in the comments below. Until then, I'll talk to you later. See ya. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment, smash that like button, and always subscribe for more. And of course, there are other videos floating around somewhere on the screen, so click one of those and see if you can find something that suits your fancy. Till then, I'll see you later. Bye.